Welcome to Life Vision Experience Town Hall. We are glad that you're joining us today. We're so excited to have you here. And if you're watching us on Facebook, this is the perfect time to start streaming. We have some great conversations going on about what's going on in our country today, in our communities. And I am so proud to introduce to you Bishop Carroll Johnson from Life Vision Church in Orlando, who's going to be bringing some important topics, how to concentrate on what's going on, how to work around what's going on, to heal our country and our communities, and how we can help each other. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Bishop Carroll Johnson.
Thanks, Emily. We appreciate you being here to help us to put this on tonight, this evening. And it's a great time to come together. We've had a wonderful time with the Life Vision experience since Friday night. And we're looking for, this evening is spectacular. And this town hall is sort of the closeout of everything. And we want to talk about get some kingdom voices on some of today's hot topics. And so thanks so much for helping us pull it together. And I'm excited to bring on with us tonight our good friend for many, many years, Bishop Douglas Miles from Koinonia Baptist Church in Baltimore, Maryland. Amen. We thank the Lord for you, Doug. Come on in and greet everybody.
It's a pleasure to be with you, Bishop Johnson. We share more than just our Baltimore roots. We're both Hopkins alumnus and been in ministry together for several years, and I've appreciated all that you've been able to accomplish in ministry.
Yeah. Would you just take a minute and just tell them a little bit about yourself? Some of the people from Life Vision Church in here in Orlando and even in Baltimore are from a younger generation, and they may not know about some of the things you've been involved with down through the years in Baltimore.
Well, on August the 18th, I celebrated 53 years of preaching.
Wow.
I preached my initial sermon on August the 18th, 53 years ago. I've had the privilege of pastoring the Browns Memorial Baptist Church in Baltimore, where I served for 15 years. And then 4 years of pastoring Greenwood CME Church in Memphis. And then the Lord led me back to Baltimore to establish Koinonia Baptist Church, which was begun in 1992. And just recently, we've celebrated 28 years as a ministry. We have one of the longest standing after school programs in the state called Project Safe Haven, and several other programs have been modeled after ours. We have a daycare center. I just retired as co-chair of the BUILD organization, Baltimoreans United in Leadership Development, which I served, not as co-chair, but served in several capacities for 40 years. And I'm currently the co-chair of the National IAF Network, the Industrial Areas Foundation Network of community organizing networks throughout the United States and Europe.
Wow. And that work with Bill was really essential work in Baltimore. And certainly I was attracted by what Bill was doing. And I think at the time, I was probably the only Pentecostal apostolic church that was involved in it, but I was attracted to the solutions that were being put together, particularly with the Nehemiah homes. That kind of thing was, when I went to college, it was, how do we get the churches together to have an impact on our communities? And so Build was certainly important for that. And when I came here to Florida, I began working with similar organizations here. What I want to do is, a couple of topics I would like us to jump into, so I don't want to belabor the point. I want to get right into it. And of course, we're living in what is, I think, I hate to use the word unprecedented because it's used so often right now, but this opportunity where a couple of streams have come together at one time with the pandemic, the Breonna Taylor, George Floyd, and the elections, and all of this stuff has come together at one time. And I think it, certainly in the area of the what I call a demonic stronghold of racism that has engulfed this country for 400 years. And it seems that with everything coming together and the support from not only other races, but all over the world to pull down this stronghold of racism, that is a great window. And I don't know how long this window is for us to work on it. But one of the things that emerged, of course, is Black Lives Matter movement. And those young people kind of grabbed the bull by the horn after Ferguson, and they began organizing and coined the term and sort of got the trademark on it. And so one of the, and they were ready. They were ready for the moment, and just emerged all over the country and around the world. And the church is kind of like caught almost blindsided about how we connect and what we do. And so what I'd like you to talk about a little bit is how you view our young people, kingdom young people, church young people that come up in church, the younger generation. How do our young people see themselves connecting, and how do we connect, bring the church into this, and what is our perspective?
I think several things at play right now. I think it's important for us to understand that our young people are actively involved in the Black Lives Matter movement. And it did kind of blindside some of this generation, of our generation. And that blindsiding took place largely because we lost connection with our own children and grandchildren. The Black church today is not what the Black church was 40 years ago. A multi-generational, economic-based institution. It's largely now an institution of baby boomers and some millennials, and those who have stuck with the church, but we've lost so many of our young people along the way. And in the process, this movement sprang up, and as happens with all spontaneous movements, there's no clear agenda and no clear leadership. And that can cause movements to be hijacked by people who sometimes don't have the best motives in mind. Therefore, our young people who participate in Black Lives Matter ought to go into it with some training from their local church. One as to how to build an agenda that can be enacted, how to set goals, how to identify real leaders from just talking heads, and how to bring kingdom principles to bear in the Black Lives Matter movement. I think those of us with much gray in our hair would make the mistakes if we tried to go in and hijack the movement. I think we would be roundly rebuffed. So it has to be those of this current generation, millennials and Xers and Zoomers, who will have to take the lead for the Black church in this instance within the movement itself.
I've heard some pushback from some of the churches, and some particularly folks that would go to, say, like the Black Lives Matter organization's website and look at the agenda that is uppermost in their minds. And when we look at it, sometimes as pastors, traditional churches, we would look at that agenda and say, I'm not too comfortable with engaging from that standpoint. And that's why I was saying that even though some of our young people just marched out into the street and grabbed a sign and went along with whatever was going on, if as you said, getting an agenda in front of our young people, helping to put that together.
I think it's also recognition that we have to be honest to acknowledge that the world is not the same world we grew up in.
Right.
The social mores are not the same, and that the church. When I was in seminary, I had a professor who said it this way: that the first 1,000 years of the church's life was the struggle with whether or not one had to be Jew or Gentile to be a part of the church. The second 1,000 years had to do whether or not one could be bond or free and be in the church. And that the next 1,000 years of the church's life would be spent settling the question as to whether or not one was straight, gay, or whatever. So
Yeah.
I think that that's where we find ourselves at the church right now, and we have to wrestle with that. We have to come to the realization that there are many that who we minister to on a daily basis who are not heterosexual, and it's my firm belief that God loves them no less than He loves
Right.
anyone else, and that the church has to expand what it is. And when I say that, not in terms of what the gospel teaches, but in terms of traditions we have put in place.
Yeah, I agree. I think, in looking at a way to, because I deal with a number of streams that have an old school fundamentalist view of doctrine and involvement. And many of them have never been involved in anything related to social justice at all anyway. So it becomes doubly difficult for them and the young people that are there. And I sort of, in my mind, I envision it like this, racism is a multi-headed big monster. And if one group is over here banging on the right knee, then we could bang on the left knee. But all moving together to bring it down.
And I think that all of us have a role to play, whether we're, fundamentalist, evangelical, and I define evangelical in two strands. There's evangelical with the big E, and there's evangelical that most of us find ourselves in, that we firmly believe that the gospel is an evangelical gospel. But as you said, racism is so deeply embedded within American culture that if the church, and particularly the Black church, which has been the most prophetic voice in the life of this nation, does not rise up and take back its place as the prophetic voice in this nation, then we miss this Kairos moment that God is calling us to. So I firmly believe that, and we have to get away from just being involved in praise and worship.
Yeah.
Because if that's all we're going to bring to people in this generation, we're going to be soundly rejected. And I think that the teaching of the New Testament in particular, we're going to have to go back to the strategy of the New Testament church, which found itself a minority community in a majority community that was hostile to it.
Yeah.
And to understand that our role is to be the salt of the earth, that we have to have those difficult conversations, and we have to challenge the powers that be that tend to undergird racism. Europe developed racism. America perfected it.
That's a good one. Well, we're going to come back to talk about a little bit about that stuff in terms of where we're going as a church. And I'd like to get, at this point, one of these young voices in.
Hi, my name is Deborah Tadesse, and I 100% fully support the Black Lives Matter movement and every single thing that it stands for. My only problem with it, and something that I find a little bit absurd about the entirety of it, is the performative activism. How Black lives have always mattered and will continue to matter, but people only choose to talk about it in certain situations and about certain people. They talk about George Floyd, but they forget about Tamir Rice and Sandra Bland. They talk about Breonna Taylor, but they forget about Eric Garner and Michael Brown. And the thing that makes me the most upset is the counter arguments against the movement. The Blue Lives Matter movement, for example, they're unopposable. We cannot rightfully justify the comparison of occupation versus humanity. That's an injustice in itself. I don't wake up and put my black skin on from 9 to 5. This isn't a job for me. This is my life, And that's what makes me upset about the whole Black Lives Matter movement opposition. The fact that there's even opposition, it just baffles me. How I'm fighting for not only my human rights, but for the human rights of an entire race, and there are other people who who don't want me to do that, who are angry and are upset at me for just wanting everybody to be equal, you know? And that's another thing. I'm not saying, and I don't think the movement is not saying that Black Lives Matter more than. We're just highlighting Black lives, Black oppression. We are saying that Black lives matter, period. Have always mattered, will always matter. We're saying Black lives matter, all Black lives matter, and Black lives should be equal to the lives of we should all be equal. And right now we're just highlighting how we are not equal and how different ways that we can get to equality for all. And it'll be a long road to get there, but we're gonna get there, you know? And that's why I think the Black Lives Matter is 100% important. I cannot justifiably find any reason to not support the Black Lives Matter movement, for anybody to not support it. It is something that is an incredible movement. The fact that we're only just talking about Black Lives Matter now highlights something too, highlights the importance of social justice work, of equality and the importance of it, and the fact that we've got a long way to go.
Hello, everyone. I hope you've been enjoying the programs on the Lifevision experience. We've been featuring entrepreneurs, supernatural talents and abilities, artists, musicians, so many things that can happen when you just let God use your gifts and abilities to help bring happiness and improve the lives of other people. It's been great. I hope you'll agree with me when I say Lifevision's got talent. And one of the things we want to do is we want to spread this to more and more people. Let's you and I be the spark that can take this same programming and take it to hundreds and thousands more people. It's called the power of pooling our resources. When we put things together, what we could never accomplish by ourselves, we can accomplish together. And it's really, really very simple. So can you just take a moment with me right now before we do another thing? And just take out your mobile bank. I like to think of this as my mobile bank. No lines, no waiting, no delays. There's two easy ways that you can actually be a part of this and take what's in your hand to help spread what is happening in this Lifevision experience. First, you can easily go to your mobile apps in Cash App. It's not too hard to remember, $Lifevision. Once you give there, give your best gift that you can give, and we can help keep this going. A second way that you can give is on the website, Lifevision Orlando. If you go to Lifevision Church Orlando, give on that website, you can make a donation, because what you have in your hand really does matter. And don't forget to support the men and women who are God's gift to the world, that are doing their thing and are giving it all they have. It's a little thing that can mean so much when we take what we have and we put it together with others. We can move mountains. So definitely, let's do this now before we do another thing. That's it. All set? Great. Let's check out more programming at the Lifevision Experience.
Well, welcome back to Lifevision Experience, our town hall tonight with Bishop Doug Miles from Baltimore, Maryland. And I want to talk a little bit about the church being confronted with COVID-19 and how people have had to, on a dime, sort of find ways to connect with your people and connect with the community. And I think it's also been a time for us to reflect on some of the things that we were doing before, and while we're in it, and then as we sort of look to go out, will we operate the same way we were operating before we went into this thing? What do you see as far as the church operating right now in the midst of COVID and coming out of it?
As you said when you were introducing this evening's program, this is unprecedented times for all of us. No one alive today has experienced, well, I'm not going to say, but know of the effect of the pandemic of the 1917-18. So this is the unprecedented time. And even during that time, persons who were rich could escape it. This time around, no one can escape COVID. It is really a pandemic worldwide. And it's impacting everything that we do, and including how the church has to operate. I think in one respect, it was a blessing to the church to be challenged to shut down in terms of not being able to meet on a regular basis in a place. So it is forcing the church to redefine what church is. The church is much more than a building. The church is a koinonia, and it's a fellowship. It's a fellowship that should not and cannot be confined to a space of worship. I think it also speaks to how we will have to do worship going forward. I think in one respect, for a long time, going forward, the idea of mega worship is going to have to be placed on the back burner. And people are going to have to meet in smaller groups where they can build relationships with one another rather than building relationship with a building. Secondly, I think it's going to impact commuter churching. People who have grown accustomed to virtual church on Sunday morning for an hour 15 from the comfort of their living room are not going to be willing to make an hour-and-a-half trip or an hour trip to church for service, and they're going to stay on virtual church. So the church will have to adjust to that. Additionally, to be effective, churches that are located in communities are going to have to dig deep in their communities and again make the local church a community-based church. I think in some respects, because of our ability to commute, the idea that the reality that the Black community was no longer a segregated community, people moved up and out of old neighborhoods, maintained their relationship with the church, but the church did not retain relationship with the community. That's going to have to reverse. And people from the neighborhood are going to have to be invited to become a part of the church if the church is to survive.
I agree 100%. I guess for the last year and a half, I've been teaching on transitions in worship. The fundamental idea was that when Jesus came, the Jewish worship model was in the temple building. Everything was centered around that building and the pomp and the circumstance, the choirs, the musicians, and the orders of the priests. When Jesus came, started talking about the kingdom and taking a small group of young folks to be taught. When the church was born on the day of Pentecost, it was in a house, upstairs in a house. And they worshiped from house to house. And when they tried to keep going to the temple, they kept getting arrested, and they wound up getting Stephen killed. And they finally got the message that maybe we need to leave this building alone and get out of here and go to Judea and Samaria and the uttermost parts of the world. So I've been teaching that we were going to be moving out of the temple-based times. You know, the Catholic Church and all kept that going for 1,000 years. But when the pandemic came and churches actually shut down, I was flabbergasted at how fast that transition could take place. And a lot of the things that you said about people learning to worship at their house, learning to appreciate the presence of the Lord in their house, and to be able to connect with the other believers from the comfort of their house, from house to house. You know, I've really been enjoying watching some of the church's response, because there are a lot of pastors that couldn't let go of the building, so they go back and go in the church and broadcast from the church, as if to say, we still got church here, but we're going to your house. But I just think that we're in that phase where we just have to become comfortable. And I watched this, the Democratic National Convention, and it was funny. The first couple of nights, people were saying how weird this is, And then by the end, you heard all these reports saying, we never want to go back to that building with all those people there. This was much better. This was much easier. There was no traveling. There was no hotel expenses. We got faster business done. We don't want to go back to the old. And as you said, there are a lot of people who are going to remain comfortable staying there. So I believe it's a time, what I call a Sabbath year, that the Lord shut down the whole world for a Sabbath year, which is a part of his plan for the planet, is that every seventh year, everything ceases. Let everything regrow, let everybody reorganize, get back in touch with our Creator. And I think that's where we are. And coming out of it, it'll be interesting to see how much has evolved. If it ends in the fall or if it ends next year, it'll be very interesting to see what the church looks like coming out of it.
Isn't it amazing how far we have moved away from the way of life that Jesus left us to the institution that we created? I've been led, just as you, my whole preaching moment since the beginning of the pandemic has been from the Acts of the Apostles, right, and reminding the church of what the church's real mission is. And I began in Acts, the first chapter, where Jesus ascends to heaven, and they're standing watching him go up, and one of the angels said to them, you men of Galilee, why are you standing here gazing up when this same Jesus is going to come again? And that's what the church has been doing for the past 25 years. We've been lost in praise and worship, gazing up. And we've forgotten that our call was to go back to Jerusalem, to stay in Jerusalem till empowered, then to get out of Jerusalem and go to Judea, Samaria, and the uttermost parts of the world.
Yeah, that's exciting. I believe some really great things are going to be happening in the midst of this terrible crisis. Lost a lot of people, and particularly folks that people of color have been impacted so much because we're in the frontline workers and having to go into work at factories and meat processing plants and all that kind of stuff. But I do believe a whole new vision of church and ministry will come out of this that is connected to the community. And I'll say some more about that in the last segment. I'll just knock around a few ideas with you in the next segment.
All right, and I hope we touch on the church and education.
Okay.
What's happening in terms of education?
Beautiful. Let's do it. We're going to take a quick break. I'd like to bring in another voice of our church operating in the community right now, and let's see what Black men are doing, even right there in the city of Baltimore. Welcome back, everybody. We've been having a wonderful time together with Bishop Douglas Miles of Koinonia Baptist Church in Baltimore, Maryland. And I want to turn our attention a little bit now to the problem of gun violence, homicides in our communities. This has been a pervasive issue for years in many of the communities where we have our folks, you know, it's been a plague on us. And one of the things that has kind of been interesting to me, just an observation, that when there's been an uprising in a community, and particularly in response to police shootings of Black folks, that, for instance, in Baltimore, the homicide rate had been going down, but when the Freddie Gray incident popped up, homicides began to shoot back up and have stayed that way. And the same kind of thing has happened, you know, after other uprisings down through the years. So what I want to just put it to you is, you know, your thoughts about how we as a church and as a community engage in trying to deal with this piece of gun violence and homicides in our communities.
I think the church has to take a dual approach. And I think what's often overlooked is our need as the church to rise up and demand real gun control, beginning with background checks of those who want to purchase firearms. We have over 350 million firearms available in America, more firearms than there are citizens. And a lot of those firearms find their way to inner cities, not by chance, but by design. In Baltimore, it was identified that there was one or two gun shops in particular, just outside of Baltimore City in Baltimore County, that were supplying most of the weapons that hit the street in Baltimore. And they were doing it through either straw purchases or claiming that they were broken into and guns were stolen, dealing out the back door. So we have to get some regulation on the gun industry in this nation. And I believe it's 94% of Americans are in favor of simple background checks, so that it makes it more difficult for persons particularly those who participate in mass shootings, make it more difficult for them to get guns. There's a campaign going on now through the network of churches of IAF called Do Not Stand Idly By, where we're challenging police departments to sign on to our proposal to move to smart gun technology. There's technology available so that if a person loses a gun or a gun is stolen from them, that gun can be made totally inoperable from the moment it's stolen. There are also locks that can be placed on guns that make them totally inoperable. But if the owner needs access to it, he or she can open it with a voice. I've seen this technology in the gun shows in Europe, and American gun manufacturers are blocking that technology from coming here. In fact, a shop opened up in Maryland and was roundly attacked by the gun lobby in Maryland. It was forced to shut down, even to the extent of the person being threatened with his life if he stayed open. So that's one approach. The other approach is that the Black church, I think, again, being the only real institution that we own within our community, is going to have to go to the streets, because these are not aliens who have dropped in from outer space. These are our sons, our daughters, our grandchildren, our cousin, Pookie and Shay Shay and Rookie, that we know that we're going to have to confront. And if we don't do that, then the gun violence will continue to be as pervasive as it is.
Yeah, along those lines, I agree with you. And the technology piece is astounding. That you know, you ask yourself, why would they not want to have those safeguards on, other than to feel like, well, at least we can just they can kill each other down there, and that'll be good. I was thinking about Operation Ceasefire and some of those projects that have been implemented in various cities going back 20 years, where the police department identifies that probably 90% of the gun violence is perpetrated by a very small number of individuals. Generally, like 60 to 80 people are responsible for mostly all the gun violence in each urban area, and they know who these people are. And so, you know, trying to implement some programs to be able to start reaching out to those folks and try to, you know, bring some more reconciliation and trying to turn them in a different direction. But I think there's, at the end of the day, once we deal with the technology, the background checks, there's a spiritual piece to it that I think just flows from the first city. You know, you go back to Genesis chapter 4, the first city was built by Cain, who was a murderer. and that spirit is pervasive. It's been pervasive in urban areas and cities all through. So we come into that with a spirit of murder already on the city. And of course, you know, when people are pressed in the wrong kinds of economic situations, they tend to gravitate to it. I used to have a saying of, like, because so many of something like 60 to 70% of our families are now headed by single mothers, and across the board, this is Black, white, Hispanic, 70% of those single mothers no longer go to church, and so we have a saying that, you know, when the mamas stop coming to the church house, the kids start going to the jailhouse, because they are missing that whole spiritual component that the church is to provide. But I do think that at some level we have to find ways to engage with the folks that are committing to mayhem in our communities.
And that's what I was saying about earlier about the church needing to get back into relationship with the communities where it's located. Additionally, I've proposed in Baltimore a campaign that I'm calling No More Excuses, where it challenges all segments of the society to take its share of responsibility for what's going on. That the philanthropic community has to produce real training programs that lead to real jobs for persons who are caught in poverty. That the politicians have to develop real policies that call into account those in leadership to provide the essential services that are needed in communities to make them whole. And that those who are perpetrating the violence have to be called to account, that either you're going to choose to take advantage of the new opportunities offered to you, or we're going to have to come down on you with like a hammer, even as we seek to save your soul. But this kind of level of violence cannot continue to persist if we're going to have viable communities. Yeah,
I just want to say two things about this for jump off of it. I remember being at there was a big rally here in Sanford, Florida, when Trayvon Martin was killed. And it's the time when everybody was here, all the civil rights leaders were here. And there was a young man that engaged with me, and we started talking about Second Amendment stuff and the guns. And he said, brother, we're taking the wrong approach. He said, we as Black folks needed to go and purchase guns and train them, and we need to be armed in our community. And he had some other reasons for it, but when you begin to think about it, George Zimmerman was a part of a community watch group where he was to go out and ride around the community and look out for troublemakers. And unfortunately, he was a nut himself, and he was armed. But this past week, I was reading in Nehemiah 7 that after he got the people together to clean up the neighborhood, and everybody was to clean in front of their house and fix the wall in front of their house. And after he got the wall built, and he realized we have a security issue. So we're going to set up some guards all over, but we need the inhabitants of the city to take up guard posts in front of their house. They got to be armed, and every person is responsible for guarding the area around their house. And I down here in Florida is a different beast, man. I was at a minister's meeting.
Mayhem that would proceed from that.
Well, let me tell you this. I was at a minister's meeting on Saturday morning, and a couple of the ministers started looking at their watch, so they had to leave. So when we went outside, I said, "Well, where's everybody rushing to?" He said, "Oh, we're rushing to the shooting range," and like all of them were packing. And at our church in Baltimore, we had a bit of a scare, and I called a detective friend of mine to get some tips on what we might do. They moved from a safer environment into an environment that was a little touchier. And so they started talking about maybe having a security guard or something like that. And then my daughter called me and said, "Oh, don't worry. It turns out a number of the women here are packing already." So she said, we got it.
One thing we don't need in America are more guns.
I understand the sentiment, but I just want to throw that out there.
That's where we have devolved as a community. And what troubles me about it is the inference that it's Black folk only. Every group of people in this country who resided in urban communities and experienced extreme poverty became violent. No one talks about the mafia anymore, or the Irish thugs who ruled Boston and other areas. But everything now is focused on it's Black folk. If we really want gun control, I would agree with the pastors on that. If every Black man went and applied for a gun permit, we'd have gun control tomorrow. That's
right. That's right. That's what happened when the Black Panthers rolled in out there in Oakland. This is great. We're going to take a break here, and we'll come back for our last segment. Thank the Lord for Bishop Douglas Miles and his insights on gun violence in our communities.
Are you tired of the violence, nudity, vulgar language, and all other negative things on television? Well, guess what? You are not alone. Lifevision TV is a new and exciting network for the whole entire family. Get Lifevision TV on Roku, Amazon Fire Stick, Apple TV, and of course on our website, www.lifevisiontv.com, and on Apple and Android apps. Lifevision TV, already making TV better.
Bishop Miles, I think you were originally, your church was on Greenmount Avenue, right?
Right. And we never had a security team. No church I've ever pastored has had a security team, because what we discovered was that if you have relationship with the community will watch out for the church.
Yeah.
I've had drug dealers come up to me and say, "Reverend, everything okay?"
Yeah. Well, that's the same way our church in Baltimore is. We're now at Gwen Oak and Liberty Heights. So
if you maintain relationship with the community will look out for you.
And my grandson lives on Greenmount, just a couple blocks below North Avenue.
Okay. Oh, and the new developments, that and the new houses that was built by the Build organization.
Okay.
City Arts and all the City Arts building and all of that new housing that we did that.
All right. That's beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. Well, let's talk a little bit about that in this next segment. So let's just jump right into it. Welcome back, and we're excited about this. This is our last topic for tonight, but it is an area of developing kingdom communities. Right now, all over the country, we've gone through a cycle of segregation, redlining, housing laws, which allowed us to live anywhere. And so in a place like Baltimore, we sort of chase our Jewish brothers up Liberty Heights and up Ricestown and up Park Heights, shove them out, and then we follow them out into Baltimore County in the suburbs. And we got out there and realized we have no political power out here, so you're gonna have to build a power base all over again. And while we were out there trying to build, we looked back over our shoulder, and some other folks had moved in. we moved out. I remember coming to Baltimore a few years ago, and we were driving down Inner Harbor East, and we're driving through, and I lost my bearings. I mean, I saw all these restaurants and people were sitting outside eating and stuff. And I said, where the heck are we? And so at the corner, I looked up at the sign and it said Caroline Street. Look, wait a minute. There's the church I grew up in, 4 blocks down the street here. And it looked like I was in a whole new world. But that gentrification has come to Baltimore. I remember in DC, my aunt and uncle went to Way to Cross Church, D Street, Southwest, and they were there for 50 years. But the neighborhood gentrified and started to put the squeeze on them. They couldn't park where they made parking difficult. You all make too much noise at church, and you hold church too late at night. And basically, they drove them out of the community. And as you said earlier, we have commuter saints. They're still affiliated with the church in the neighborhood, but we live in Randallstown, and we live in out in Owings Mills or Ricestown, and we drive in and drive for 2 hours and get the heck out of there as quick as we can go. So what, in the sense of community, that with churches sitting almost isolated in a community, and a large base of the community no longer lives in the community, no longer invests in that community, is there a way for and again, this whole thing about Nehemiah wound up with the same situation after they fixed the city up. He said, in Nehemiah 7, he said, after he put the people on the guard post, he said, wow, the city is large and spacious, but there's hardly anybody in it because nobody is building houses in it. No houses have been built. So in Nehemiah 11, he goes back and says, well, look, what we're going to do is all you all that live in the suburbs got to cast lots, and 1 out of every 10 has to agree to move back into Jerusalem and build in the city to build it back up. How do you see our urban communities at this point, and particularly the core city areas?
Well, we're facing that problem in Baltimore of gentrification, as you said. But I think that our organization, the Build organization, and our sister organizations around the country have taken a different approach, that you can develop communities that have multi-level housing, multi-level income housing. Our original project was in Sandtown. We built 100 homes there, but it never took off because the city and the state failed in what they were supposed to do in terms of building community. It's one thing to build houses. It's another thing to build neighborhoods. So we learned off of the Sandtown situation that you have to build from strength. So our next approach was building adjacent to where Johns Hopkins is developing the EBDI area there and all of the biotech park there. So we focused in on the community where the Dawson family was firebombed several years ago.
Right.
And we've either built or renovated over 400 homes in that area. And what we found is that there are particularly, and Baltimore, people get wedded to neighborhood. There were many people who were forced out by Hopkins who wanted to come back into the neighborhood. And we've had no problem selling homes in the range of $250,000, $300,000. But at the same time, there are other homes that persons can buy for less income. And we even have some Section 8 housing in the mix. What we've said is that you've got to develop a neighborhood. So one of the first things we did, we bought a liquor license to close down a liquor store. Because the area was saturated with liquor stores. And most of the areas where new housing is built in our neighborhood, in our community, do not have the amenities of neighborhood, simple things, a grocery market, a bank, a place where you can get appliances fixed, just basic things. What we end up with are sub shops, chicken shops, nail salons. So what we're focusing on is building community. That's what we've tried to do over at the City Arts Project in what's called Greenmount West, where we put up housing for people in the arts, and every apartment was leased before we finished.
And that's where my grandson lives. My grandson and his wife live there.
Housing associated with, adjacent to that, gone in the blink of an eye. And so what that did, it fostered other development in the neighborhood along Greenmount Avenue, going down toward Preston Street, industry and shops where entrepreneurs can get their start. New development going east on Preston Street. So you can rebuild communities without isolating the people who formerly lived there. But it has to be done intentionally. And in our instance, it was the Black church that took the lead. Two churches of the Build organization put up $2 million worth of land and property. We leveraged that with $10 million of corporate dollars that then leverage government dollars so that persons could go into their home with equity and with a decent mortgage payment.
That's fantastic. I love that model. That is the way I envision that the churches would look at the community around them and have an organization like Build that can partner with them to develop a vision for that area around the church. And if the next plot, there's some churches that can see and develop out from there so that they all match together. I think we can really make some serious impact in creating neighborhoods.
But you've got to be willing to become political, not partisan, but political. Our organization represents 40 plus churches and some community associations, some parent groups. So we have the political muscle where we can demand from our elected officials certain things. And if you don't have that political muscle, you can't change policies, you can't change where government dollars go. So the first thing the Black church has to look at doing is reorganizing itself and not behind any one leader, but behind a collective of leaders so that no one leader can be bought off or shot off. That's
beautiful. Go ahead, say something about education you brought up before, and I'd like you to too.
Well, I think the pandemic has created both a challenge and an opportunity for the Black church. Historically, the Black church provided the space for education that public schools did not provide. And in this pandemic, with so many parents having to work and their children having to learn virtually, many of the church buildings are left vacant during the course of the week. Why not open that space to part learning where volunteers can come in or some paid staff can come in PPE and work with the young people who are being forced to learn online without the assistance of parents. I think that's a very valuable space that the church can fill. And again, it's not unusual for the Black church to be engaged in education. I think the other thing it's done is it's given parents a greater appreciation for teachers and what teachers have to put up
yeah.
and what teachers go through on a daily basis. And it's put to lie that the thing that's often said, we need prayer in the schoolhouse. No, the problem is prayer in your house. Now,
that's right.
In this opportunity, are you praying with your children before you take them into virtual learning?
That's right. That's powerful. I love the idea. One of the things I've said coming out of this is a reanalysis of the use of the buildings, because we got these big buildings sitting there and used for a couple hours on a Sunday, a couple hours on a Tuesday in most cases, and it's really a waste. When we're trying to develop entrepreneurs, those churches can become incubators for the young people that are in the community that are trying to develop businesses. But the piece about the education is that is a super idea, and we need to really push that real quickly right now while we're in this window.
This is the time of the clarion call to the Black church to rise up and be that which we have been historically in this country. In fact, I'm writing a book now called A Legacy for Our Children, where I'm challenging and chastising baby boomers for what we did not do in terms of instilling within our children, so they couldn't instill within their children the story of where we came from, and how we overcame. And so this is the clarion call to the Black church to get back to its roots of engaging community, of being that one voice in the community that cannot be silenced from outside the community.
Amen. Well, I tell you, I think it's been a wonderful discussion that we've had tonight, and I'm indebted to you for taking the time out of your busy schedule to share with us. And those of you who are on Facebook, you know, we forgot to say this earlier, but if you didn't share it now. You can share it after it's gone off. Maybe there's some people that you know, some pastors, some ministers, some church members, some community folks that you think would be blessed by this. Share it to them even after we've gone off. Let's get the word out. Let's get this discussion out in the airwaves across this country. And we thank you for taking the time to tune in with us to the Life Vision Experience. Those of you, some of you have been with us from Friday night, Saturday night. And again, we thank you all. You know, as we just celebrated just before this town hall, my wife and I, Pastor Muriel, it's our 50th wedding anniversary. And we thank the Lord for the prayers. We thank the Lord for the grace of God that has kept us during this time. And for all of you all who have been a blessing to our lives. And we just bless our children. They're not children, they're great adult wonders in this community, and our grandchildren and all the saints there in Baltimore and here in Orlando and Tampa. God bless you. May the grace of God be upon your lives as we go forward. Thank you for tuning in.